Oh. Okay, we're at the top of the hour, so I'm going to call this meeting to order. And first up, I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the unceded territories of our friends and neighbors in the Saucon Nations, and grateful for that. Next up, I'd like a motion to approve today's agenda. Moved by Pearson, seconded by Meadows.
Your worship.
Right. Okay, all in favor? That's unanimous. Oh,
Sorry, there was a resolution on the screen to amend the agenda.
oh. Okay, can we back up a little bit and that the agenda for May 15th, 2023 special meeting of council be adopted as amended. Item 6.1, overview of Capital Regional District services and partnership, move to immediately follow item number 4. Addition of supplemental information to item 5.1.
So
All in favor? That's unanimous.
Your worship.
Yes.
Sorry, you're still in the special council, so you need a mover and a seconder for each one.
Sorry, motion to resolve into committee of the whole. That council resolves into committee of the whole to hear authorized delegations and reports on the matters of the CRD services and partnerships and DCC charge credit front ender and latecomer policies. No seconder required. Oh, we do. Okay. 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 All in favor? That's unanimous. Okay, so next, delegations, CRD leadership team. Presentation of the CRD executive leadership team.
Good afternoon, Acting Mayor.
And if you could turn on your microphone, please.
Thank you. Try again. Good afternoon, Acting Mayor and members of council and members of staff here today. My name is Ted Robbins and I'm the Chief Administrative Officer of the Capital Regional District. We want to thank you for providing the opportunity to allow us to come and talk about the CRD, tell us a little bit about the services we provide, introduce our leadership team and share a little bit about the work we do and answer any questions you may have at the end. So just starting with introductions, with me today, I have, like I say, members of our leadership team, Larissa Hutchison on the end, our General Manager of Parks and Environmental Services. Next to Larissa, we have Kristen Morley, our General Manager of Corporate Services, who is also our Corporate Officer. And then we have Ian Jesney, our Acting General Manager of Integrated Water Services. And then Kevin Lorette, our General Manager of Planning and Protective Services. And then here at the table with me, we have Nelson Chan, our General Manager of Finance and Technology, and also our Chief Financial Officer. So we know some of you probably already know a little bit about the CRD. We know a few of you have been members of different committees and commissions over time, sometimes acting director at the CRD board table. But we thought early in the term here would be an opportunity for us to hit the road, so to speak, and we're trying to meet with all councils across all 13 municipalities to share this presentation and introduce ourselves and provide an opportunity to answer questions. So we do have a presentation to provide you today. We do have some slides to guide the work. We're going to provide a quick overview of regional government and the CRD more specifically. We're going to talk about CRD service delivery and provide a financial overview. And then there's some slides at the end that we know we don't have time to present today. The slides provide some highlights of key projects that we're working on and represent the work that's happening in the different departments across the organization. But we thought we would keep them in the deck just for some additional information. And if you do have any questions, like I say, you can always follow up after today as well. So let's go ahead and get started. So what are regional districts anyway? Well, regional districts are an order of government that were established by letters patent in British Columbia in 1966. And as a result, we have quite a unique local government structure here in British Columbia compared to the rest of Canada. Skill testing question. Does anybody know how many regional districts there are in BC? 27. There are 27 regional districts in BC. And regional districts really rose out of a need for greater regional cooperation on regional and sub-regional issues and service delivery. And today, regional districts really have three basic functions. So we do provide region-wide services, such as solid waste management, parks, and regional planning. And a number of those region-wide services are mandated services by the province. We also provide intermunicipal and sub-regional services that can be delivered more effectively with a group of municipalities through a shared service delivery model. And of course, the beauty of that model is at a sub-regional level, municipalities really can choose which services they want to participate in at the regional district level. And then finally, the third function is to act as the local government for the unincorporated areas of the regional districts in British Columbia. And of course, in Capital Region, we have three unincorporated areas that we call electoral areas: Salt Spring Island, the Southern Gulf Islands, and the Juan de Fuca electoral area, of course, neighbors to the District of Sauk. So this table gives you a better sense of which level of government provides which services and where the jurisdictional authorities lie. And we include this slide because often the members of the public are a little bit confused as to what the role of the regional district is, what the role of municipality is, and then what the role of senior governments are. So when you see this table, it's easy to understand why members of the public are sometimes unclear as to who does what and who is responsible for what. So just referring to the table with parks, for example, there are municipal parks, and then of course there are regional parks that the Capital Regional District is responsible for. And then in the electoral areas, we have local community parks. And then of course there are the provincial parks that the province is responsible for. So wide range of jurisdictional authorities when it comes to parks. Likewise with water and wastewater, just as an example, the municipalities of course operate municipal wastewater collection and treatment systems, as is the case in Sauk. But the CRD operates sub-regional services such as in the core area and out in the Sandwich Peninsula, where we provide wastewater collection and treatment. And likewise with water systems, of course, the municipalities in some cases operate their own municipal water systems. In the case of Sauk, of course, the CRD operates not only the regional system, but the Juan de Fuca distribution system, which provides retail level water for the District of Sauk. But the province, of course, gets involved in groundwater licensing and other groundwater matters. So again, a wide range of jurisdictional authorities in there. And with health, again, another area where there's often some confusion. Of course, the CRD operates the Capital Regional Hospital District, who partners with Island Health to provide community services. We provide healthcare facilities in partnership with Island Health and coordinate capital spending when it comes to health infrastructure in the region. But of course, the province is ultimately responsible for public health and healthcare services. So again, just to give you a sense of where the regional district sits in all that. Just for some context, the CRD, as you know, covers a large area, about 237,000 hectares to be exact, and our population now is growing. The population of the Capital Region currently sits at about 440,000 people. The district's comprised of 13 municipalities and 3 electoral areas, as I mentioned, and there are at least 18 nations that identify parts of the Capital Region as traditional territory, 11 of which have reserve lands and settlements within the regional district boundaries. Many of those nations that are within the CRD do receive services from the CRD, either directly or indirectly through the CRD or sometimes through neighboring municipalities. And of course, as you know, the CRD is comprised of both rural and urban areas. This diversity certainly makes the region unique, but often can lead to some interesting discussions at the board table, as you know, when it comes to those rural versus urban issues. In terms of the governance and the administrative structure of the CRD, the governing body, of course, is the CRD board with 21 municipal directors and 3 directly elected electoral area directors, all of whom make up the 24-member board. First Nations in the region do not participate at the board table. Only modern treaty First Nations have representation on regional district boards in British Columbia. And of course, the closest example is the Tsawwassen First Nation, which has a seat on the Metro Vancouver board. But there are currently no modern treaty nations in the CRD, and as a result, there are no representatives at the CRD board table. The board chair annually establishes standing committees. We have 10 standing committees currently at the CRD, and generally speaking, recommendations on policies and direction to staff are provided by the standing committees up to the CRD board. And then in addition to the standing committees, as many of you know, there are a number of commissions and committees that oversee the different sub-regional and local services at the CRD. So we actually have about 70 committees and commissions that oversee those services, and they're established by the board to oversee operations and the administration of those sub-regional local services. And as you might know, the CRD also operates 2 other corporate entities. So as I mentioned, we do have the CRD board, which was established in 1966 when the CRD was incorporated and given its service authority through letters patent. But then we also have the Capital Regional Hospital District, which was incorporated in 1967 by way of the Hospital District Act to mandate the sharing of capital costs for regional health facilities. And then the Hospital District Board was established thereafter in about 1974. And then we have the Capital Region Housing Corporation, which is a wholly owned subsidiary of the CRD with a mandate to develop and manage affordable housing across the region. And we do have the same administrative structure for all 3 entities. And here's a shot of the 2023 to 2026 board. Director Plant, of course, is the current chair of the board, the chair and vice chair elected annually. And of course, Mayor Tate is the vice chair of the CRD board this term. The board also has represents the Housing Corporation, as I mentioned, and the Hospital District Board as well. So same composition for all 3 boards. This term, the board has set 5 strategic priority areas. We were glad to have the board come to agreement on the 5 priority areas quite early on in their term. So this term, of course, the board has decided to focus on transportation, housing, climate action, and the environment, First Nations, and governance. And for those of you who are familiar with the previous board's priorities, you may see some continuation there. And certainly this board agreed there's still more work to do in those higher level priority areas. And so as a result of those conversations through strategic planning, we've developed our corporate plan, which the board has now approved. Just a cover shot there of the 2023 to 2026 corporate plan. So that plan incorporates 134 specific initiatives that we will deliver over the next 3.5 years, as the term keeps clicking by here, to support those 5 priority areas of the board. And we've captured those 134 different initiatives under what we're calling community needs. And those are the 5 community needs on the right-hand side of the slide there to categorize those initiatives and assign them to the different departments across the organization who will be responsible for delivering those over the coming term. So just moving to an overview of the CRD services and a financial overview, I'll have Nelson take it from here. Thanks, Nelson.
Thanks, Ted. Good afternoon, Council. Just want to say thank you very much for inviting us. Really happy to be here. It's actually halfway on my way home. Drove by my house, gave a wave to my kids, and kept coming along. So it's beautiful out here in Soo. Thank you very much for that. As Mr. Robbins mentioned, just a brief overview, perhaps a little bit of orientation on CRD services. The CRD offers more than 200 services, about 230, I think, at my last count there. We split them out between regional, sub-regional, and local services. As Mr. Robbins had mentioned, local services, particularly around the electoral areas or single participant services. Sub-regional really being a combination of the 13 municipalities and 3 electoral areas, and then regional with all of the participating jurisdictions in the region. You'll have a nice little handout there in front of you, something we like to call CRD on a page. Shows all of the participating jurisdictions on one axis and then the number of services on the other axis. I did leave the local services out, otherwise it would be even smaller and harder to read with those included. But you can really see, particularly in the sub-regional section, as Mr. Robbins had mentioned, participation in those services is elective. You can come in or out of those services, and I sometimes use the word, it looks like Swiss cheese, but really speaks to some of the customization and services that jurisdictions find more beneficial or more cost effective to have the regional district deliver those on an economies of scale perspective. But can certainly take some questions or any questions on that a little bit later on. The next slide is really just to show a little bit of differences from a financial or budgeting perspective between municipalities and regional districts. What's a little bit different is, as I mentioned, those 230 something services, we do manage independently and separately from each other. It's really the only fair way, depending on the participation, that we can cost apportion effectively and through a transparent way. So I do manage about 230 sets of books. Versus municipal delivery, you have one sort of general revenue stream, which you can allocate to various services. So that's a key differentiating factor between regional districts and municipalities from a financing perspective. For context, the 3 entities that Mr. Robbins had mentioned for 2023, our budget was just approved, just under $700 million. But just gives you a size, a scale and scope and size of each of those entities that are listed there split between operating and capital. As I always like to say, it's never a finance presentation without a really ugly table and lots of numbers. We did our best to highlight Sooke there in a bold, but this is our requisition table for 2023. So the CRD, I was really proud that the CRD approved a budget in 2023 of around 2.8% on requisition. Consolidated for Sooke, it is 0.8%, so less than 1% impact on Sooke. And really that speaks to the combination of regional and sub-regional services that Sooke participates in. On a summary basis, we always like to show this to give some context. You can see the average household in Sooke pays about $720. Into CRD services. That's split between the regional district at about 550, the hospital district, as Mr. Robbins mentioned, cost sharing with Island Health on major capital projects. That's about $66. And then as required by legislation, all financing through municipalities flow through the regional district. So roughly $100 out of that 720 that Sooke taxpayers pay into property taxes for the regional district is really for debt that the municipality takes on. All in all, when you work it out, it's about less than $2 per day to get all of those services. There's a little donut diagram there at the bottom to highlight some of the major contributions in terms of where the money goes towards the CRD. By far, the largest service that Sooke residents participate in is Sea Park, the recreation service just down the road on Phillips Road. I think that actually concludes, my presentation. We've got the balance of the slides include major projects. We can certainly speak to any of those, either Mr. Robbins, myself, or any of the general managers, but just wanted to take an opportunity to thank, council and of course staff as well. We do a lot of great work with your staff and value their inputs in bringing forward some really valuable services to the community. So thank you very much for that, but we'll open the floor for any questions.
Okay, well, thank you for that. And I will see if councillors want to ask any questions. I'll take Councillor St. Pierre first.
Okay, this is a question actually dealing with water service a little bit, as Mr. Robbins might have expected. I'm curious about the provincial jurisdiction over groundwater when the CRD is protecting a watershed. How does that actually work? Because we're protecting watershed that's putting the water into the groundwater, but then we don't have control over the groundwater. So how does that actually play out?
Yeah, well, certainly through acting mayor, when it comes to the CRD's role in protecting the watershed, that's really limited to protecting the Greater Victoria water supply watershed, which of course includes three watershed areas, the Souk Lake watershed and water supply area, the Leach and the Gold Stream. Beyond that, in this area, we really have no jurisdiction over protecting other watersheds, whether they be more localized watersheds or even urban watersheds. We sometimes get involved in working groups to assist in protection of those other areas, but we have no jurisdictional authority when it comes to, for example, protecting a watershed that may be related to a stream or a creek or a river beyond the Greater Victoria area. So that's where it gets a little bit interesting in terms of the jurisdictional authority. Like I said, as you noted, and as we noted in the presentation, the province has jurisdiction over groundwater and groundwater well licensing, but they have very limited scope in terms of actually managing or protecting the watersheds associated with those groundwater wells.
Okay, I'm curious because there have been resolutions that have come forward at UBCM and such in terms of actually making some changes because of issues like specifically in Courtney. But I was curious as to whether or not there were issues here in terms of the licensing with the wells and such, and just the messy jurisdictional issues around that.
Yeah, no, it continues to be a little bit messy. I mean, obviously there are provincial requirements and in some cases local requirements in terms of locating septic fields and setbacks associated with streams and creeks and other water bodies. But beyond that, there would be a number of jurisdictions involved.
Thank you.
Hey, Councillor Beddoes and then Pearson.
Yeah, hi, this is a question for, I guess it is Nelson, CFO. The climate action and adaptation. Do you know offhand what the budget is for that group, please? I know I'm putting you on the spot here that you just pull it out of your top shirt pocket, but.
Through the mayor, I don't know what it is in total off the top of my head, but I can tell you that the Souk contribution to that service is roughly $55,000 per year. If that's helpful.
$55,000 per year.
That's correct.
Okay,
At least for the 2023 budget, it's 55,000.
okay. Thanks very much.
Councillor Pearson.
Yes, thanks for your presentation. Good to see you again. My question probably to maybe through the chair to might land with Rissa Parks. We have a large interface with CRD Parks, including the regional trail. And recently at a council meeting, we heard about fire protection and working together. Is that a priority given like the temperature and that large interface between wildfire and what we're seeing and the municipalities? And what are you working on in the background? Because we heard something about that.
Probably more so from the parks perspective.
Thank you very much, Acting Mayor. CRD does not have direct responsibility for fire suppression or management. We have crews that support either municipal crews if our park that has a fire is within a municipal jurisdiction, or in the electoral areas, we work with the province. We come up and help manage public access and do some mop up. With regards to fuel suppression and control, certainly that is a priority for us when we're looking at management of parks. And we can certainly have more input from those that are on the ground if there's feedback that we need to hear on that issue.
Thank you. And I just noticed that because I use the Galloping Goose Trail quite a bit. And I noticed that the fuel level is along that trail is building. And there's you have a program of keeping the trail clean, but keeping the trail clean means it just starts to pile up on the side.
Okay, thank you very much for that feedback. I'm going to take that away, and we can certainly provide a response to council with regards to management of that issue.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bateman.
Yeah, you could stay up there. I have a couple for you and for Mr. Rahman. So I'll just start. And I think there's a general sense that the CRD is a parent organization that we represent 3% of the CRD here population wise. And you sort of operate at a distance, but apart from the services, I've discovered there's a lot of interaction, consultation, brainstorming, and engagement between CRD staff and our municipal staff. Could you give us a sense of how that works and what kind of benefits you provide to the District of Sauk on that level?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Acting Mayor. We have a number of intermunicipal working groups. So I know for my own department, we have an intermunicipal working group on climate action. So we work with your staff and staff across the region with regards to policy development, new news coming from the province, studies that we're doing. There's a lot of grants that we apply and we pull in all those that may be interested in receiving funds through those grants. We also work intermunicipally on climate at the elected level as well. So we have a steering committee that where electeds get together, talk about climate action strategies, policy and bylaw development at the municipal level, and exchange information. We also have intermunicipal working groups with regards to Parks and Rec. We have one, the engineers get together, and I think that would be the same thing for CFOs and corporate officers and so forth. Is there anything you want to add to that? Yeah.
So does this, under the community needs local government? I haven't been able to find that particular document, but what's entails there?
Yeah, certainly through Acting Mayor. Yeah, if you're referring to the document that I referred to, which is our corporate plan for this term, the community need local government really talks about primarily the work we intend to do in the electoral areas.
Okay.
We needed to have a home for the specific initiatives for the electoral areas within the region. A lot of that work is captured there, but there are other initiatives there too. Of course, everything ranging from work we want to do in our boardroom around accessibility, and looking for expanding the boardroom, audio and video equipment to make the meetings more engaging for members of the public. So a number of things we're looking at doing related to governance within the organization itself are also captured under that priority.
Okay. Moving along, the Hartland landfill, that's been a primary subject in recent meetings, and the framework report that was part of this discussion of the new bans at Hartland discussed a series of CRD owned and operated recycling depots located throughout the region. And you might in fact explore partnerships with municipalities and private operators as well. Do you see a timeline for that kind of work going ahead? Because certainly out here on the West Shore and certainly in Sauk, we could use a mini Heartland, as I think Mr. Smith described it.
Yes, through the chair, with regards to the bans that are being proposed, those are coming forward January 1st of 2024. So for council's information, in case you haven't heard about that, we're going to be banning wood, clean wood, treated wood, and salvageable dimensional lumber. We're also going to be putting a ban on carpet and underlay. And asphalt shingles. So we'll be putting out contracts for recycling or reuse of that material so that folks can come up to Heartland, deposit those materials at Heartland, at our Heartland depot. There'll be different cost structures for those different materials, and then we'll be recycling them. But hopefully the industry is going to develop and that residents will be able to take those materials directly to the private sector if that's what they choose to do. With regards to private depots, there's no plan to enter into any formal partnerships, financial partnerships with depots or to consolidate depots. The private sector has a well-established markets for recycling and for taking recyclables throughout the community. We do a lot of coordination with depot owners and operators, and we have a consolidated website. So if you would like to know where you can take different materials, you can go onto myrecyclopedia.ca, and all the local depots will be listed with everything that they take at their location.
Okay. So that Metro Vancouver model of public-private partnerships perhaps are
Through the acting mayor, at this time, no, we're not.
No,
We're not
okay.
looking at that.
Now, while you're here, at the Environmental Services Committee meeting last month, there was a motion made that staff consider increasing the level of ambition in our climate action policies. And you provided an interesting reply to that. Could you share your thoughts on how much the CRD can do in terms of climate action?
With regards to climate action, the CRD's Climate Action Service, which has a budget of approximately $1.4 million overall. We have about 6 staff. We provide 3 different pieces of climate action support. One is internal to CRD services. So if there's going to be a retrofit or a new build, climate emission reductions, taking a look at retrofits at Sea Park, for example, the Climate Action Division would support that. We also provide support to municipal climate action strategies through the 2 committees that I mentioned previously. So we do a lot of information sharing. We're doing a study on heat vulnerability right now, for example, which will be shared out with all the municipalities. And then we also provide support to the community. So we provide education. We did an electric vehicle roadmap strategy, and we provide climate action to go kits in our library. So we work with school-age children doing curriculum development. So there's a lot of work that we do at the community level. CRD does not have local planning authority to really drive climate or greenhouse gas emission reduction through bylaw only in the Wantagh-Fuca. So municipalities like Sooke really have a lot of the direct levers with regards to climate response throughout the region. So we can provide support in terms of sharing. One example would be the deconstruction bylaw that the City of Victoria has just brought forward. We can bring that to those committees and have conversation about that. But the CRD doesn't impose those types of bylaws municipally. That would be something for the District of Sooke to consider.
Okay. So in summarizing that answer, your feeling is that the Environmental Services Committee unanimous motion to increase the level of ambition. In fact, you are being as ambitious as you possibly can here in 2023.
Through the chair, we have through the acting mayor, I'm sorry, we've brought forward some new policies with regards to retrofits and new builds that meets the highest standard of the STEP code. So CRD is going to be doing its part with regards to driving change with our local, with our service delivery. But that's correct. There's only so much that we can do at the regional level.
I have a couple more, but I'll defer for now.
Okay, Councillor St. Pierre.
Thank you. I'd actually like to follow up on some of the comments that Councillor Bateman was making. So I'll be asking you again, but anyone can feel free to answer. I've been part of the Intermunicipal Climate Action Task Force since last term. And one of the things that I know at this point is that the CRD, at least in terms of some of this work, has to be basically providing a leg up to all the member communities. It can't be focusing its efforts on any one community, like for example, Sooke. But one of the things that I think that all of us struggle with is basically the cost, for example, of, a large scale effective educational campaign to reach out to the public with information on what truly effective climate action looks like. So there's a huge amount of disinformation out there. Everybody's in a little Facebook echo chamber, and there's a lot of, honestly, conflicting information that is put out there. It could be the role of either regional government or higher levels of government even to actually step in and actually say, this is actually what needs to happen. So for example, the Saanich report pointed at, and you can see it in your strat plan, transportation, housing, those are the big ticket items. And I would suggest food. It's also recognized as one of the big ticket items, but by and large, the public isn't necessarily aware of the things that they can actively do in terms of consumer choices or what else they do. And they don't necessarily trust the information that is back and forth. It's a huge endeavor and we're like a lot of money and resources to actually reach out with a good educational campaign to basically nail down, this is CRD's priorities and they should be yours too, or something along those lines. Because actually those priorities are also the same priorities that this council is holding in terms of our climate action plan that most communities hold, because that's what the science and the stats say. I'm actually kind of begging one more time. You've got the deeper pockets and the means. Is it possible that CRD could step forward with that type of a campaign? Because it would make a huge difference. That would be real climate action. And it's not something local governments like ours can actually do. but it's certainly something that I think would be within your purview.
Yes, through the acting mayor, what I would suggest is that that you follow back up with the intermunicipal steering committee. I don't attend those meetings on a regular basis, so I don't know if you've raised this with such an appeal at that table, but certainly that intermunicipal steering committee can make a motion up to the environmental services committee and drive policy change or drive service level adjustments up through the environmental services committee and the board. If it's something that you find your colleagues at that table really feel that the CRD should be doing more of.
Good. And I have one further. Okay. The other thing that has come up with all of this is actually food security. And certainly food is actually a regional type of concern. It would be beneficial to have a regional food policy council. Having said that, I don't actually think that local government or regional government is nimble enough to really do the work. But as a host organization or potentially providing funding or support, that could be a different story. And so I'm curious as to whether, I know that there's been some work towards acquiring farmland and making use of it. And I'm wondering if something along these lines would have any sort of appeal for the CRD or the board, I should say.
I'm actually just going to step down and bring my colleague Kevin Lorette up to talk to that.
Thank you.
Hello, through the mayor, acting mayor. The work that we are doing on, like we did a regional food and agriculture strategy, and out of that, one of the recommendations was an establishment of a regional foodlands trust. That's the work that we're undertaking right now in terms of scoping what that could entail. We're looking at a couple parcels in the region that we want to run a pilot on, and then we'll go out and canvass the municipalities to see if there's interest in a regional service, and if not regional, who would be interested in a sub-regional service. So that work is ongoing for 2023. We anticipate by the end of the summer, we can bring back a report that identifies how a foodlands trust could operate on a parcel, and then how we could expand that. So look forward to that coming back through our Planning and Protective Services Committee in the fall of this year.
Just a follow-up question. So I'm aware of the good work that's happening in that direction in terms of acquiring and actually unlocking the potential of farmland using the Foodlands Trust. I'm more curious about whether or not it'd be possible for the CRD to have some role in basically putting in place a regional food policy council, which would actually look at various pinch points in the legislation, because you've got VHA issues, you've got provincial issues, you've got federal issues, you have local issues, you have all sorts of issues at all sorts of levels of government. And sometimes you have other organizations, again, that are involved with regulating food. Your average farmer doesn't have the ability to actually affect that legislation or speak strongly to it. But a policy council, especially a regional one, which would actually represent, many local governments, could potentially have enough clout to maybe look at some good policy change. Right now, we really desperately need some policy change in order to actually increase our food security, but we don't actually have the entity to make it happen. But I'm suggesting, and there's good research to show that a regional entity could actually have that role. And I'm curious as to whether or not you think there might be an appetite, and how I would approach this, how we might approach the CRD with that.
Yeah, through you, the acting mayor, I think if we can get a service established in a foodland security, that would be at least the starting point. Right now, we don't have that. We have a planning function really, and we've got a food and agriculture task force that reviews work. And so it provides recommendations back up through our Planning and Protective Services Committee. But I think the first step would be able to establish that service where we play a role. And then I think there could be, as you're suggesting, maybe more discussion at the regional level, but we probably have to go stepwise through that process and first get the service.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Beddoes.
Yeah, a little follow-up question for Parks, Rissa. Musical chair, yeah, sorry about that. The Galloping Goose Trail, myself, and I know Councillor Pearson's up there several times a week running. And I encountered bears and dogs, which I have absolutely no problem with. Bicycles are just going to kill me one day. Is there anything you can do to better signage that area? Because it's this time of year onwards, I'm confronted by 10 or 12 bikes traveling in a group coming down there at 30, 40 miles an hour, it seems like to me. Sometimes from behind, they don't ring their bell, they don't call out. So I know you can't be up there policing it, but I would really do appreciate some better signage. And put some onus on those people to watch out for our older people that are up there jogging. It's a great trail, and again, I don't have any trouble with dogs. I see bears every year, but the bikes are going to kill me one day unless something's done. Thanks. I want to get the shot in today, so thank you.
Through the acting mayor, I can actually respond to that. You're not the first individual who's brought that concern forward. Electric bikes have certainly raised the speed on the trails. We're seeing that throughout the system. We have put more money into enforcement. So in fact, we may be out this way to do some enforcement with regards to trail etiquette. We also have plans to do a lot more education around trail etiquette. And so signage may be a big part of that, and we'll swing back through working with your staff here locally and just to confer about where that might be best placed. So thanks for that feedback.
Councillor Pearson, did you have something? Okay. Yes. Oh, sorry, Councillor Bates.
Just a couple more. I'd like to invite Mr. Chesney up. You know, back in January, early January, the East Suit water supply study was released, and that raised some eyebrows around here, of course, because it looks at expansion of water into the area from Cooper's Cove up to 17 Mile House and then down to East Suit Road. And I'm curious as to I know it was received for information by the Juan de Fuca Water Distribution Commission. What are your thoughts on that study and what it might foretell for perhaps the longer term future?
Through the acting mayor, the study was originally brought forward by Director Hicks at the time, because he was talking with a variety of developers in the Souk area, and he was looking at it as if they were going to develop land, how would that help out the areas of Anderson Cove, Seed Tree, and Wilderness Mountain in particular. And so we just asked the consultant to look at, if there is going to be development out here, how might it look? The consultant actually had some connections with and talked to a variety of different developers, and came up with the report that you saw. And there's a lot more being read into the report than is actually there if you get right into the details, and it doesn't foretell of anything. It's just that it is feasible to do, but if you do it, it's $40–50 million in today's dollars, if I remember correctly, and development will take the lead. But the idea was are there going to be developers that are interested in this time, so that it might help out Wilderness, Seed Tree, and Anderson Cove in particular. There would be another whole level of study to be done if it was a fully blown realistic study. And because of the water service up to 17 Mile House area, we threw that into it at the same time, but it was not to indicate that there is going to be development there. Developers will, and governing bodies like yourselves will determine when and where the development takes place, and the market will, of course. But Souk is sort of the next market. Since Langford is filling up, it'll move out this way. I'm sure all of you know that. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah. So also determining factor would be the regional growth strategy, of course, and our limitations on sprawl. Very likely, but this would be a CRD board decision in due course.
That's correct. Actually, that's what I was going to add. There would be servicing policy changes required through the RGS if we were looking at extending the distribution system out into the Souk area. As Ian noted, this study really stemmed from concerns around decreasing groundwater supply, decreasing or impacts on surface water supplies, particularly at Wilderness Mountain up in East Souk there. And also, of course, there were concerns raised around the fact that there was initially going to be some funding allocated to extend the distribution system as part of the highway project, and then that changed at the 11th hour as well. So there were a number of reasons why we felt it was time through Director Hicks to do this study, but you're absolutely right. If we were, that was just to give a sense of demand and the cost of infrastructure extension, but certainly if any of that was to actually occur, there would be policy changes required.
Right.
In advance.
And the regional growth strategy, its lifespan, I know it passed in 2018. So it's good for 20 years, is it? Or
Yeah, I believe it's 2038.
2038?
Maybe you're. It's through you, Acting Mayor. Just the board has to consider any changes to it every 5 years. And so within a 5-year span, we'll check into, has the population changed significantly to warrant an update? And so the board would consider updates every 5-year cycle.
And yeah, I'm personally, I'm happy to see that the CRD is looking at taking a regional approach to transportation, because as one of the many commuters over the years on Highway 14 into Saanich, there's a definite need for some continuity there. And with that, I think climate action, I think it's something like 70% of Souk's working population commutes daily. And so that is our largest greenhouse gas emissions. And so if, I don't know if you have some plans to kind of help us mitigate that with your climate action strategy and your transportation strategy.
Yeah, certainly through Acting Mayor, I can start. As you noted, the current board is focusing on transportation as a priority this term. And in fact, there's a report going to the Transportation Committee this week on Wednesday. It's published on Friday if you're interested in having a look at it. And it's really the next report to start to inform the board, get the board starting to think about the direction they may want to take to ultimately potentially consider this term a regional transportation governance model. We're going to tread cautiously. This week we'll be presenting the report that provides a few examples of different models that could apply to the Capital Regional District, but just for the board's consideration at this point. With the direction this Wednesday, we hope to start engaging with stakeholders, initially including the municipalities and other key stakeholders like BC Transit, BC Ferries, Airport Authority. Not the public quite yet, but starting with the stakeholder engagement, just to really understand what the different stakeholders believe the problem to be and what potential solutions there might be, and whether or not the stakeholders are in agreement that a regional transportation governance model might actually provide a benefit. So early days, we're gonna tread cautiously, although the board would like to see this priority move quite quickly. In fact, I think the board is hoping that by midterm, which is only a year and a half away, we are in a position where we are actually presenting different governance options for the board's consideration, with the hope of determining a preferred option by the end of the term and potentially even starting some form of implementation. So that's pretty aggressive. And obviously a lot of the decisions are beyond the CRD's jurisdiction, depending on the model that is preferred by the board. If that's where they go, there would potentially be legislated changes required at the provincial level, and obviously the municipalities would be involved in that at some level as well. But that's the hope, certainly, of the board. And as I mentioned, through Kevin's team, we're bringing a report to the Transportation Committee this Wednesday to start to inform that process. But as you noted, Acting Mayor, there is also interest in the board, with the board, in aligning transportation and housing priorities and climate. And so, in fact, with that, reports moving forward, after we work through an internal process, we're going to be demonstrating to the board with every decision the board makes how a decision potentially aligns transportation, housing, and climate, as well as a few other lenses, given that the board is really focused on that this year. When it comes to housing, for sure, there's going to be a real push to ensure that housing proposals are aligned with transportation goals, whether that's transportation routes, looking at different mode shifts, obviously tied to different types of housing. So that's certainly a focus for this board. And I would have to say that this is probably the first time where the board is making those connections across all the priorities. So that's very promising.
That's great. And what about EV charging stations? Any support for municipalities on that front?
Colin Larry. Okay.
Through the mayor. So just a couple of points of clarification. So the 2023 climate action and adaptation budget is 2.3 million. The incremental portion of that is pushed towards a level 2 and level 3 electric vehicle charging infrastructure, regional electric vehicle infrastructure. There's a planned 146 charging stations to be built within the region within the electrification strategy that we have. It is grant dependent, but we've had a great relationship with Clean BC in the past, but expect that to in 2023.
Excellent, thank you. Councillor St. Pierre.
I'd just like to follow up on Councillor Meadows and Councillor Jeunesse and the transportation. Curious about the Galloping Goose, actually. I don't know if there are any plans in this direction, but I'm curious if there might be. The Galloping Goose travels close to various population centers at various points, but there doesn't seem to be necessarily a lot of services along the Goose for basically people who are using it. And I was curious as to whether or not the CRD might be in a position to actually do some zoning in some areas to actually promote industry, well, commercial mostly, to actually serve all the people that are actually on the Goose, and then potentially to extend it outwards through its park system to Port Renfrew, Jordan River, all the rest, and essentially have well, cycling pedestrian infrastructure that actually would be more or less under the control of the CRD. Not something you necessarily have to discuss with MOTI or anything like that, but I'm curious, is there any, I think I heard something about something in that direction, but I'd like to know more if that's happening and potentially put a word in, because I think it would be highly beneficial to making better use of the trail if more services were available along the length of it.
Certainly, I'll start through acting mayor and maybe I'll call on Larissa just to talk about future plans for trail extension. Of course, as you would know, the CRD doesn't have land use authority except in to the electoral areas. So we would have to work closely with the municipalities around decisions related to zoning on properties adjacent to the trails, the regional trails. And of course, that would also come with servicing in most locations, with the exception of water, where we operate the Juan de Fuca water distribution system. Any other services in terms of underground services to support development would also largely be within the municipality's jurisdiction. But again, we're certainly happy to, we don't have a service authority necessarily for that, but we're always happy to work with municipalities to coordinate those opportunities, particularly as it relates to future trail extensions. And maybe I'll ask Larissa just to talk a little bit more about future regional trail extensions.
Yes, thank you. Through the acting mayor, we do have a regional trails management plan that's in place. It was adopted about 6 years ago, intended to be a 15-year document. We're recognizing that there's so many, the file is so dynamic that we're likely going to re-engage and update that management plan earlier than we thought, by about 5 years or so. So at this point in time, all of the ideas that you brought forward are not reflected in the regional trails management plan. We have no formal plans for the extension of the Galloping Goose. There's one phase of the ENN, phase 5, that may be constructed down the road if we are successful with grants. We have many priorities for the regional trail system, and most of that from a financial perspective is focused in the core, where we have plans to widen and lighten the ENN and Lochside trails, spurring 2 kilometers in each direction from uptown. So that's a lot of information, but when we come back forward with a regional trails management plan, some of those broader ideas that you've just brought forward would certainly be a topic for input and debate.
Maybe I could just add to that too. Of course, one of the first steps, if you read the report that's going to the Transportation Committee this week, one of the first steps we would take is actually consider the regional trails under a transportation service, essentially a transportation function. A lot has changed, as Larissa noted, over time from the trails simply being a parks asset to being a critical transportation asset now. So we'd be looking at aligning those as the first step as part of an ongoing move towards a broader transportation governance model.
Shifting paradigm.
Yeah, I can remember back in the day waving at the engineers driving past my grandparents' house on the Galloping Goose. Yeah, I am. I'm getting up there. Councillor Bateman.
Two last quick questions to you, Ms. Hutchinson. Now, parkland acquisition west of the Soup River was a priority of the CRD. Does it remain so?
So
A
the
leading
acting mayor,
priority?
certainly parkland acquisition is a priority. Our land acquisition strategy is being renewed. Right now, we're just finishing off First Nations engagement on our strategic plan for regional parks and trails. And then coming right after that is our land acquisition strategy. And so that will set a new frame for where our priority areas will be with regards to parkland acquisition.
Thank you. And Mr. Chan, a final question from me anyway. You mentioned earlier your budget this year. I think the board asked you to keep the requisition below 3%. Is that correct? And you managed to come in below.
So through the mayor, acting mayor, annually, staff take a report through our finance committee to set essentially the bookends for our service and financial planning. That's annually done in about May. So in May of I gotta do the math. So in May of 2022, we brought a report forward and the board asked us to contain the budget within inflationary pressures. As we sort of set forth and given the context of when May happened versus spikes in inflation, we were forecasting an impact of around 3% at that time. Of course, as we got into the summer months, we hit a slew of hyperinflation rates, 8, 9, 12% in some cases. And of course, Victoria CPI came in at 7. As an administrative and executive team, we decided not to change that direction and continued with our forecast of 3%. I think what that drove is a behavior organizationally around turning over a lot of stones, looking at value added, non-value added work. And as a result of that, brought a budget in to the board at 2.8%. And was really happy and proud of that. There was quite a bit of debate on that budget through multiple meetings, but in the end, the board did resolve it where it sits today.
Yes. Well, thank you for that work. Yeah.
Oh, you're welcome.
And our finance director, Rachel Gray here also brought through a fabulous, I don't know how you manage it, given the fact that that cost of living was, as you say, 7% year to year. Yeah, congratulations to you both. Thank you for your work.
Thank you, Councilor. I would say that there's definitely some strong headwinds. It's difficult to operate in a 7% cost pressure with a 3% revenue line. So definitely some strong headwinds as we go forward in the 5-year plan for sure.
And I'll also just add to that, that was our target based on the board direction, but primarily focused at the requisition increase. Certainly in other areas, for those of you that have been on the water commissions, you'll know that there are pressures associated with the water rates, for example, particularly in services like water, where we have some fairly capital intensive programs associated with utilities. And that's where we're really seeing some cost pressures, whether it's labor costs with the construction sector, material costs, et cetera. So certainly, although our requisition for the most part was held at that 2.8% increase, we certainly did have other fees and charges and some rates that were above or below that 3% line. Certainly in the case of the water rates, they were above that 3% to deal with some of those pressures. But this year, of course, the board just recently, just the last meeting, approved the guideline for 2024, and we're setting a 3.5% target for the 2024 budget. So fingers crossed.
Lots of work to do.
Okay, any more from council? Okay, I'm just gonna invite members of the public to provide any input if anyone would like to speak. Don't all jump up at once. Okay, well, thank you for your presentation. So all good news, mostly. And so the recommendation is that the committee of the whole recommend council receive the presentation titled Overview of the Capital Regional District Services and Partnerships for Information. All in favor? That's unanimous.
Thank you very much for your time.
Are you leaving so soon? Sure. We've had a request for a break, so we can resume at 2:06. Oh. Okay, we're gonna call this meeting back to order, and next up, we have a presentation by Dr. Elizabeth Lang and Shandell Holden. Dr. Shand, oh, sorry, well, I'm just reading what's on the screen here.
Would you like some?
Both highly qualified.
All right. Well, thank you. Thanks for having us. Yeah, it's been a long time coming. It feels like I'm really happy to be here. So yes, I'm Dr. Shandell Holden, and this is Dr. Elizabeth Lang. I think most of you are more familiar with Beth than myself. We're here on behalf of the Fireweed Foundation to talk about climate education in Sooke and to develop our climate education project with the district. Is this okay? All right, here we go. Just a little bit about me. I am a postdoctoral researcher at Royal Roads University. I teach in the School of Environment and Sustainability. As well, I research in the School of Education and Technology. So my specializations are in education futures, as well as climate communication. And I am actually also co-authoring a book on misinformation. So all of that comes together to inform what we are proposing here today. And Beth can tell you a bit about her work.
Okay. I'm an honorary and adjunct professor in the Institute of Sustainable Futures in Sydney, Australia, actually, after serving 3 different universities here in Canada across my career. And so my area is sustainability education. And now, of course, over the 25 years I've been doing this, now that includes, of course, climate education. So looking to transform how our culture operates so that actually humans continue to exist. They say right now we're in the middle of a 6th extinction. We're eliminating our very life base for human life. And so if we don't have some change, I think we're going to face a very grim future.
All right, so Fireweed,
that happy
note. Fireweed Foundation. So this is a nonprofit that Beth and I have started to respond to a lot of the gaps and the interests that we saw emerge over the course of being members of the Climate Action Committee for Sooke. We were, I think it was 1.5 years was the term, and we were contributors to the Climate Action Plan. And the Fireweed Foundation is really about developing education strategies for communities and organizations to respond to what is happening in our ecologies and our climate. In particular, we are actually responding to a past motion from last summer that was essentially requesting some kind of organization to do this work in Sooke. And so we are here today having established that and to tell you about what it is that we're hoping to do for the municipality. All right, so in specific relation to the Climate Action Plan, in section 5, how we relate, there are 4 actions. And what we're proposing is to develop a project that is responding to actions 2 and 3, which can be summarized as acquiring funding to do community needs assessments and to develop evidence-based workshops to share reliable climate information and climate education. That means that we're proposing to do a research-based, community-driven education strategy in collaboration with the District of Sooke in 2 phases. What we're talking about today is the first phase of this work. All right, so phase 1, we're proposing to collaborate with the District of Sooke to determine what audience would be the best or the most useful audience for education engagement. There is an interest in large strategies that engage everybody, but in terms of education, it is really important to actually know where people are at and engage with them where they are at. So targeted strategies that respond to people's needs and desires. So the deliverables for that include a professional needs assessment and data analysis. This would involve interviewing and surveys, and then analysis of that data. From that analysis, we will also develop an education engagement strategy. So it'll be specifically responding to that group's needs based on the data assessment. And then as part of that, the final deliverable will be a workshop that will respond to those needs, do the work that we're looking for in SUC, which is moving people towards net zero living, getting, you know, the interest in modality shifts actually happening, and you know, all of the things that you're talking about, Councillor St. Pierre, with respect to food and housing. How can we get people to think a little bit more with more awareness of the climate impacts of all of the choices that we're making?
So that's time. Would anyone like to extend the time by a couple minutes?
Yeah, we just need another minute. Thank you. And so phase 2 is the second part of this, obviously. That would involve actually piloting the workshop and iterating the workshop. Education is always an iterative process. And finally, training people within the district, within the public, to actually be able to deliver the workshop for their different organizations, whether these are faith communities, sports teams, whatever it might be. And also create train the trainer materials, which are materials that people can independently teach themselves how to do this work. So it becomes both something the individual can do for their community and also something that can be done by groups within the community. So I hope you had a chance to look at the budget that Beth circulated on Friday. The request that we're looking for is $10,000 to fund the first phase of the research and development of the workshop. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from council? Councillor Beddoes.
Yeah, thank you very much. I did look at your budget, and it looks like when you do the hours that you're asking to fund, it works out to $62.50 an hour. Can you tell me what's that used for? Is that wages, or is that who does that pay and who gets paid by this?
Yeah, that would be wages.
Wages for who?
For Beth and I, we would be the ones delivering all of this.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Councillor Bateman.
Yeah, so through you to, thank you for the presentation. It's exciting to see it come forward. It's the culmination of, as you say, 18 months of work by the Climate Action Committee and the SUC 2030 campaign. So in terms of that particular climate action plan piece, I'd like to ask Mr. Powell and Ms. Mogg about how they see this particular work dovetailing with what they're underway with. You've got your job position of manager of community planning, Mr. Powell, who undoubtedly theoretically would be able to use this work in positive directions. And so I'll start with Ms. Mogg. Would you like to tell us your thoughts on how this might work for you?
Thank you. I'd say I'm very intrigued. I'm quite familiar with both Dr. Lang and Dr. Holden. Often I hear council talk about made in SUC solutions. I think we have a really unique opportunity that's in line with a plan that council's adopted in principle to do the research and some of the heavy lifting, quite frankly, to deliver some solutions that are really specific to our community to respond to changing the behaviors we need to see to reach the goal that council set forward as far as the 50% by 2030. Sorry. Excuse me. So I'm excited. I'm curious to see where the conversation goes through this phase right now. Personally, within my role of communications, I'd be absolutely honored to work with both of these ladies and to work and build an initiative that works well for SUC. So a few comments.
And Mr. Powell, any comments?
I guess first off, I'll be very happy when we can fill the role of manager of community planning. That'll be a great resource to existing staff that can have that support from that manager's role, as well as support myself in the role of director. But ultimately, what that role can bring across the organization from a strategic standpoint and bringing in proper alignment for a lot of our master plans, and including the climate action plan. So one of the things that I see being the big success for the organization moving forward is more of that engagement. Our communications coordinator, was highlighting that. And so that role and bringing around strategic alignment and coupling that with the engagement aspects, and again, reaching out with, the foundation and other organizations in our community that are more day-to-day being involved with kind of the residents' perspective, we can kind of marry that all together. And so that's where I see making sure the local government and the community as a whole are both in proper alignment and understanding what our policies and bylaws are suggesting and what the community is able to get on board and even within their own capacity. So I think there'll be a bit of a testing the waters to see what everybody's resource availability is, but I think these are the proper first steps in moving forward to seeing where that goes.
And I'll just ask Ms. Gray, where might we fund this?
So options for funding, as council is aware, we received the climate action grant of 160, well, all in with the district's contribution, $162,000. So I guess it's up to council. Part of that $162,000 allocated $40,000 for specifically for a climate grant stream. This project is definitely a project that will be something we would have been considering for this grant stream. Information on that was actually going to be coming to council at hopefully the May 23rd council meeting on the grant stream with the June intake, and then to award the funds in July. So that is one source. This can be considered can be applied for through the grant stream, or if council would rather just dedicate some of that climate action funding, they could take the funding out of the $40,000 grant stream and the pool would only be $30,000. Or you can allocate some of the $10,000 from a different source of climate action funding, and then we would just have to reduce the funding in another area of the climate budget. Would be if you want to keep all the money within the climate action funding model, otherwise council contingencies available if this is something council would support from that avenue. But this fits obviously within climate action funding and ties right into the grant criteria that we were going to be presenting to council at the next meeting.
And finally, so you're seeking $10,000 for phase one this year,
Yep.
and phase two would be next year.
Yep.
Okay. And I guess I'll throw one more in since I can't stop. When you look at when you envision what the end product of phase one will look like, tell me more.
Okay. Well, I think what we're seeing is we're trying to develop a prototype workshop. So you would actually have a curriculum, basically, and that would include all sorts of messaging, all sorts of activities, all sorts of materials that would support all of that. And so what we're trying to do is that we are not the source for delivery solely. We would be one of those players, but we're trying to do this in a relationship with the municipality so that their people also can be trained to deliver, but also other volunteers in the community, whoever wants to play a role. So we're just solely working on developing the materials, and we would just be one organ or mechanism for delivery. So that's kind of how, and so we've been already talking quite extensively with staff to understand how what we do aligns and is strategic with what they're doing. So we're not specifically doing carbon reductions education solely. What we're trying to do is create a much bigger picture about why that matters so that people understand the thinking about why those particular actions that we're asking people to do, that they understand why those are important. And that then informs lots of decision making after that. And it's also about reliable. information. There's just so much information out there right now, and Shundell can probably speak better to that.
Well, I mean, I think we are all familiar with disinformation and misinformation, and the climate misinformation that is out there is quite prolific. So by providing reliable information, there's at least two co-benefits, one of which is that people get that information. The other thing is that it positions Souk as a really credible source of climate action and a leader in that. And I don't think that can be underestimated in general, but for towns of this size as well, to be seen that way, and just having that as part of the whole Made in Souk approach. Yeah.
Counselor Beddoes. Oh, sorry, did you? You can fight over it. Counselor Pearson.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. And it's important for me to hear about the piece around the why. If we understand that, then we can start going down that road of culture shift. And if we can get to that, and you know, I'm excited to hear about that approach. So it does dovetail with our strategic plan, as far as I know, because we don't really have a strategic plan yet. But what you're saying sounds exciting. We've got funding that's in line with what you're asking for. So I have no problem making a motion to bring it to regular council with our recommendation for consideration. So I'll make that motion. Oh, yeah.
Counselor St. Pierre.
Sorry, can I clarify the wording of that motion?
That committee of the whole bring this request up for funding forward to regular council to be funded from the strategic climate. What's the name of the fund that we have there? What do you call it?
Climate action plan?
Climate action. Yep. That's right. I said strategic plan. I've got two plans mixed up.
There's a lot of plans.
Could I make a friendly amendment to that?
No.
Sure.
That the funding would come from the carbon tax rebate reserve.
We have money there.
Counselor St. Pierre.
This is politics.
Are we at this point debating the motion, or can I ask more questions?
Ask questions.
Okay,
It's just a committee.
so this is for Ms. Gray. I'm curious about the grant funding versus a service agreement, given that we're looking at a 2-year finish for the project. So I was curious as to whether or not a service agreement would make more, as our finance person, would it make more sense to have a service agreement in place rather than have a project half completed and having these lovely people come back to us a year from now, potentially?
Through your worship, the grant intake was going to have an option for 2-year projects, so that was going to be covered off in there. Just knowing that there could be projects that would span over 1 year, and because this funding is only currently limited to 2 years, service agreements would just take a little more time. Obviously, legal reviews and all that would need to occur, and so it'd be a bit more of a costly, time-consuming option than the grant stream. And staff usually caution against direct awarding service agreements to just one organization when a call hasn't gone out to all organizations asking anyone interested in providing these services to submit their application. So that would just be from a staff caution point of view, to just because one group came forward that they get a service agreement. So that could open up a can of worms.
That's excellent. Perfect answer. So definitely not a service agreement. Curious about the wording that we might want to use in order to actually cover the 2-year. Would be 10,000 per year to 20, like if we're gonna do a friendly amendment to make sure that this thing is covered over for the next 2 years. Would that be acceptable or? No, I'm just. Well, we can discuss a little further. I think that Councillor Beddoes had some comments too, so.
Counselor Beddoes.
Yeah, I have a bit of problem with this, two points. First of all, the legality of it here, well, basically, the district's gonna hire 2 people to do this work. It hasn't gone out to tender. I don't know whether it's big enough to even go to tender or not. But I would like to get a staff report. We passed a climate action plan a few months back that we were entertaining for the year, spent money on it. And I'd like to get a report from staff on how this would work with that, other than just a verbal here to go away and come back with a report for the next meeting. And I am concerned about, basically we're hiring 2 people. I'm not disparaging the people who are very, very qualified for it, but is that fair to do that without maybe input from other people that would like to do this as well? So I don't know. That's my question to our CAO.
Through your worship, that's why we were trying to do this as a pilot project through a grant stream. Because we knew it's different from climate action than community grants, where normally those are going to, I appreciate for Fireweed is a society or forming an association there, but the grant stream would be open up potentially to individuals as well, wanting to do climate projects for the greater good of the community. So it's a little bit more complicated, I guess, from that avenue. And so that was going to be one of the considerations, is that salary, wages or a stipend to people were probably going to be one of the criteria that we were going to consider allowing, because this is going to be a pilot project. It's not going to be, definitely what we're going to do. We just don't know until we put the call out there what kind of projects are out in the community that people would like funding for. So I appreciate it could be a little leery, but it's giving somebody a stipend versus hiring them as an employee are 2 very different things, I guess, from a staff perspective. It's different than, hiring a consultant versus hiring a staff member. I don't know if these ladies would be considered staff members of their association. I believe they would just be board members.
My take, they'd be consultants. We're hiring them for their expertise. And is this the right process to do, where we just allocated money without going through any sort of oversight, or have our staff take this away and report back to us? I'm not saying no, I'm just saying that I'm a little bit bothered by the process.
And through your worship, I think that's what I'm trying to say, maybe a little more awkwardly, is I think you can get all those answers if we do a grant stream, because it will be similar to the community grants, where there'll be criteria and then a report back to council will come in July. Well, the idea right now would be to get council support on this for the end of May, do an intake June through the month of June. Staff would receive all the requests for funding and then bring that forward to council in July with recommendations for projects to be funded. And then we'll know a bit more about what the specific projects are and what this funding could be used for. And then, similar to community grants, there'll be a requirement to report back on the results of their projects. So I guess in 2 veins, if council doesn't want this specific initiative to go through the grant stream, then yes, we would need to bring back a separate report. If council's willing to let this initiative go through the first intake of our grant stream that we're about to roll out, then I think most of those questions would get answered in that July report to council recommending funding for these projects.
Okay, I just have to get this straight in my mind. So at this point in time, we say we agree in principle to this. It would go into our grant stream calculations. Is that correct?
It would be staff's recommendation that this project go through the climate action plan grant stream that we're piloting this year.
Okay.
Obviously, council can overrule that and just use a different bucket of funding for this. Which then your concerns may come into play with using it for consultants, but using the grant stream project, which of course it's hard to say because you haven't seen it yet. This is just a little slightly premature. I guess they've kind of preempting.
Well, that's fine. Through the chair, I really appreciate that insight to it, and that does clear up a lot of things for me. Yes, if we go through the grant stream, then we're better able to evaluate this. At that time, we'll get a staff report. Ms. Moog will give us some insight into how that works with what we've already planned, and I'm okay with that. I'm a little reluctant to just saying here's $10,000 for this right now without going through that grant stream. So that I'm not even sure what motion we have on the floor if we have one.
Well,
Tell you
yeah,
the
I guess
truth.
that someone started a motion, but yeah,
Well,
that, I mean, that
I'm
would
not
be,
happy with that unless it goes through the grant stream. If it goes through the grant stream, I'm more than happy to entertain that. But I'm not willing to entertain it, just saying, yes, here's your $10,000 and away you go. I think it has to be a little bit more input from our staff and how that all works.
Counselor Pearson.
Yeah, thanks. And just to further the comments to Mr. Bennett, through the chair, Mr. Meadows. We're at the committee of the whole, so we're only making a recommendation for council. So I would expect the details would come forward at the committee of the regular council, so that we would have all those answers. And I think staff's probably heard what our concerns are. So this is only a recommendation from committee of the whole. We're still going to debate it at regular council that you got here first. I'm not sure about the.
Ms. Temple.
carbon tax.
So even though we're in committee of the whole, it is still an active motion. So in order to dispose of the motion that's on the floor, you can either defeat it and do a new motion. You could amend it to postpone until such time as we've established a climate action grant stream. We do intend to rise and report we're in special council. And then moved into committee of the whole. So council would consider this immediately following the committee of the whole. So you wouldn't necessarily have more information because we would be talking about this again in an hour. So you can either defeat it and encourage them to come back through the grant stream once it's been established, or postpone it until you have more information through that grant stream establishment.
Again.
Could we not bring it back to regular council meeting, next scheduled council meeting, as opposed to resolving out of this council, so that we would have that information and then the grant stream would be almost ready? Through the chair, sorry.
You could do that if you wanted to discuss it before the grant stream program requirements had been established. I'm hearing Ms. Grace saying we probably won't have those for the next regular council meeting. So if it was timely that you wanted it before the grant stream was established, you could consider it the next regular.
yeah, just to add to that, we were planning to have the grant package available to council at the next meeting, to then do that on top of another standalone report for this. Realistically, with 2:30 on agenda cutoff is tomorrow. So just realistically, I don't believe that there'd be enough time to get enough relevant information for the May 23rd 23rd council meeting. So possibly defer until the 23rd when you hear what the whole grant stream is about. And then if that doesn't satisfy you, then we could reach out to them directly and get the information for the June 12th, I believe would be the next regular council meeting after that.
Councillor St. Pierre.
Oh, sorry, one more thing just to add for Councillor Bateman, when you're recommending using the carbon tax rebate reserve, there's only $18,000 left in that fund as of 2022 year end. Because the bylaw has not been amended yet to transfer other funding to that. So we have to go through a process to amend that bylaw to transfer the new funding stream. That funding stream was dedicated to a program that now no longer exists. So that is actually coming forward to council in short order, is an amended bylaw that will specifically refer to this new funding stream from the province.
So plus 7,000.
Correct.
Right. And so I'm looking at my financial plan here, this beautiful document, when it says ending in the final column, that's the end of the year is what we can anticipate. Or-
Correct.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor St. Pierre.
I fully support the work that we're looking at doing here. It's in agreement with the climate action plan in terms of education. I do think that Councillor Beddoes is correct, though, that actually running this through the upcoming community grant stream makes sense, because that just puts everything on a very even footing. Everything is very transparent, and that's what we're trying for. We want to be a transparent council that does things properly. We don't want too many questions unanswered in terms of why we're doing things. We want people to know why it's happening. And so we don't actually have the grant guidelines in front of us in terms of the climate action grants. We can't actually make sure that it's actually an agreement. So we're assuming this is right because we actually know the climate action plan somewhat, and we know these lovely people, but we don't have the actual guidelines in front of us. I would hate to see this defeated and causing problems. So I would actually prefer to have it postponed until we actually have all that information, which looks like the option that's Option number two, the council postpone. We would not need to defeat because I think a postponement in terms of amendment. Yeah, I think that I can check with Ms. Temple, but I believe that we can postpone without having to defeat the previous motion. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's true. You would just make a motion. You would make the motion that's on the screen, which would be
Perfect.
considered an amendment, and considering that passed, then it would be postponed.
Yeah, and no need to defeat. That way, that means we're not actually saying we don't want to do this thing, because that's not what we want to say. So I would make the motion that council postpone consideration of the Fireweed Foundation request until such a time as the Climate Action Grant Stream program has been implemented. Postponement basically supersedes it and sets it aside if people agree to postpone. Is that correct?
Sorry, I can't tell if my microphone's on. Yes, so the motion that we would be on then, since Councillor St. Pierre has made it, is the one that's highlighted on the screen. And if council voted in support of that, then essentially the main motion would be postponed until such time as the grant stream was established.
Okay. Yeah, as I'm sure Dr. Lang is aware, I firmly believe that education is the best way to initiate a paradigm shift. And I think that I have full confidence in Doctors Lang and Holden to carry out this training that our residents need. And so happy to support this. So shall I call the question? All in favor? Opposed? That's unanimous. So what was I supposed to read that first? So
It's fine. It was on the screen, so everyone knew what they were voting on.
everybody can see it. The motion is that council postpone consideration of the Fireweed Foundation request until such time as the Climate Action Grant Stream program has been implemented. Now, all in favor? It's done.
Yeah, thank you for inviting us to do this and then to come and present what our thinking, where our thinking has led us. So we'll hope to work with you in the future.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next up. Development cost charge. So far, so good.
Thanks. We have Urban Systems here today to do a presentation for the new policies that we've worked with them on for council consideration with regards to the new DCC bylaw went in. It includes the DCC credit policy, the front enders agreement, which relates to DCC projects, and then a new latecomer policy to replace the previous one. So they can introduce themselves and hopefully answer all your questions.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us today. So my name is Sean Heffernan. I'm a senior local government advisor with Urban Systems based in Victoria, BC. I've worked with the District of Sauk on a number of projects, including the development cost charge update, which was adopted last year. So this is very much some follow-up work to that. Well, my colleague Dan to introduce himself as well.
Good afternoon, Your Worship, members of council. Dan Huang, I'm senior advisor with Urban Systems. I've been advising the district with Sean over the last couple of years and on all things development finance, and happy to be here today.
Thank you. Yeah, so we have kind of a brief 15 to 20-minute presentation here, and then there'll be lots of opportunities for questions. Yeah, again, this work is a follow-up to the DCC work that was completed last year. This supports the implementation of the DCC program and the projects in that program. As well, there's some additional updates to the district's existing latecomer policy from 2011. I'm just going to start with a quick overview of kind of what we're looking at here today in terms of the policy development. So these policies are really used to support development constructed infrastructure. So there's certain cases where it's in the district's interest to work with the development community to provide some of this infrastructure. This infrastructure can be part of the DCC program or separate from the DCC program. And that really helps to describe kind of the two streams we'll talk about today between DCC credits policy and the latecomer policy. This is designed to support the developer constructed infrastructure for excess and extended services. So this is where developer will construct work beyond what is required to service just their development. So they're going excess or extending that service beyond what they need. And these requirements are often outlined within legislation. So the purpose of today's policies is really to provide some clear guidance to support the implementation of these legislative tools and to provide a fair, consistent, and transparent mechanism to support their implementation. On the screen here, I just have a bit of a summary of how those two streams look. So for developer constructed infrastructure that is non-DCC eligible, so projects that cannot be within your DCC program, i.e. they're not growth driven, and they're excessive what the individual is required to do for their property, the district is obliged under section 507 of the Local Government Act to provide a latecomer agreement. And essentially this is the developer will extend that infrastructure, and the other benefiters that come along after and benefit from the excess services provided will make a contribution towards that developer to receive those services or the benefit of those services. The second stream is for developer constructed projects that are identified in the DCC project list. Now, this puts them in a special category essentially where it's part of your DCC program. So you're already collecting funds through the DCC bylaw to pay for those projects. So instead of setting up a latecomer agreement, the legislation under section 565, the Local Government Act suggests that there's a credit that is offered to the developer on the DCCs that would otherwise owe for their development. So I'll go into some examples as we kind of get into the details here. And if the amount of credits that is given, i.e. the works constructed by the developer are significant enough that have, a large amount of outstanding credits, then you have the option to enter into what's called a front end agreement, which would help the developer get refunded, basically for providing those works if they are kind of reaching a threshold where they may not be able to use all those credits really effectively for future developments. So this is an opportunity to work with the development, opportunity to cost share and deliver projects on the district's behalf. This is something that comes up more frequently in communities that are fast growing and have greenfield development where new infrastructure is being provided, as well as large infill initiatives such as Sauk's Town Center, strategy in terms of increasing and densifying the core, under the draft official community plan. So just a quick overview. So the district has undertaken a process to review and update subsidies policies and to help better facilitate infrastructure cost sharing for ongoing development applications. This process included developing 2 new policies to support the implementation of the new DCC bylaw, so the DCC credits policy and the DCC front ender policy, as well as reviewing and update the district's latecomer policy, which was drafted and endorsed in 2011. all three policies have undergone a comprehensive legal review and have been revised based on legal feedback. So part of the process of developing these policies and something going forward in terms of their implementation is to recognize these are not meant to be prescriptive and solve every single problem. They're meant to be flexible and pragmatic in how they're delivered so that they can work with different unique development circumstances. And which tool is best implemented or how these are applied is outlined in these policies, and this should really be based on specific cases around the type of development, the ownership structure of the land, the timing of the infrastructure requirements, who is going to benefit from this infrastructure, risk tolerance from the district, and the development industry structure, and basically the type of development that you're experiencing. There's also a back-end need to ensure there's tracking mechanisms to support the implementation of the policy. So this has been outlined and discussed within the policies themselves. The latecomer policy, I'll start here with what we've done to update the 2011 district latecomer policy. The first was, again, as I outlined, under section 507 of the Local Government Act, a latecomer policy basically is provided to ensure that when excess and extended services are provided by a developer, that they are able to get reimbursed for those works. So an example, if you require a 6-inch water main to go to a certain developer development, and you request they build an 8-inch water main to service future development down the road because they need more capacity than what is provided to that one developer, then that excess and extended amount or difference in the infrastructure being provided can then be taken off and funded through a latecomer policy. So this would just basically be on top of the infrastructure that is required to service that one development. So in some cases it could be extension in terms of a storm main or water main or sewer main. And if that is extended kind of beyond the property boundaries or made to add more capacity, then they would automatically be eligible for a latecomer. So this isn't something that would be necessarily offered by the district, although this is something that can be done in conversation, but it's also something the developer can ask for, and you'd have to provide them if they asked for it. You said you need to build X and it's beyond what is needed, then through legislation, they can ask for this. So really this policy is helping to guide that request if it comes through, because it's something that, is a common practice when you're doing large scale development, is to work with one developer to help get the infrastructure in. This, prevents the need to kind of rip up the road over and over again if you want to kind of have those services in place for the next kind of group of developers or lands developed down the road. So again, if this is not a DCC project, it falls on the latecomer. If it is a DCC project, it fall under the DCC credits and front ender, which we'll chat about in a couple slides. And under the Local Government Act, there's certain regulations that determine how latecomers can be implemented. So this policy builds on those, but one of them, for example, is there's a maximum 15-year time limit for which a latecomer agreement can exist. So it includes kind of the payback timing being maximum 15 years, including interest. So in addition to updates regarding the statutory requirements, the latecomer policy also kind of looks into how the local government can further refine the administration of latecomer collection and payment. So some of the updates we did since 2011 are just to kind of refine some of the timing around when these agreements come into place and how they're executed and managed over their lifespan. And one of these includes an update to the actual fees for administering the latecomer. So this is something that staff will have to keep track of and be aware of and administer for a period of up to 15 years. So one of the recommendations in the updated policy is to increase the actual fee that the developer would pay to initiate this latecomer. And again, projects that are not, these are just for projects that are not eligible, DCC eligible. So now on to DCC credits. In terms of DCC credits, there's also under the Local Government Act under section 565 in the DCC Best Practices Guide, the obligation to provide DCC credits to developers who've constructed DCC works. So these are DCC projects listed in your DCC program with a cost identified. These credits are provided again in the form of a deduction on the full amounts of DCCs paid. So I have an example of this kind of later in the presentation. And this is again for DCCs paid at the time of subdivision or building permit. These are typically applied to DCCs owed for the same category. So infrastructure provided. So if you construct a sewer project, then you only get DCC credits towards your sewer DCCs. So if you owe 200,000 in sewer DCCs, and you construct a $300,000 project, then you would owe no DCCs. And I'll go through basic example of what that looks like. And the DCC credit, and this is specific in the policy to manage risk to the district, is for the lesser of the total DCC project cost or the actual final project cost. So you have a cost listed in your program, and this is kind of the difference. Say it's $2 million for a particular sewer project. It'll be, and you know, the developer then decides, okay, we're going to construct this pump station on your behalf, and in that they understand that they will only get up to a maximum of $2 million worth of credits. So if they go over, they say, you know, that actually costs us $2.5 million. You're only obligated to give them the $2 million worth of credits. If they go under that amount, then you would be able to then set up the DCC credits based on the final amount being lesser than 2 million. So this helps kind of manage the overall risk to the district by keeping it in line with what's actually in the DCC program. So this is again just kind of highlighting, you know, the different circumstances at a very high level of what this could look like, you know, upon implementation. So again, project A, if we look at column A, it's the lesser of the project cost, again, between the actual project cost and the project value in the DCC program. If project A is $400,000 and the amount of DCCs owed for that particular category of infrastructure is $600,000, then they would have a remaining $200,000 worth of DCC credit. Oh, sorry, they would be owing an additional $200,000 of DCC credits in that example. So they built $400,000 worth of infrastructure, they owe 600, they need to provide another 200,000 in DCCs to the district. Under project B, in this case, let's say the project is again the lower of the actual value or the project value, it's 600,000. The DCCs payable for the project that they've for their development is $500,000. The amount of unused credits then is $100,000. So they can take these $100,000 worth of credits and they can apply it to future phases of their development, or they could carry it forward to another project if it is owned by the exact same legal entity. And that's an important qualifier within the policy itself, that remains, the DCC credits actually remain connected to that legal entity. Because if they, often the development industry, there's shell corporations set up that will, distribute ownership amongst different companies. This actually helps keep the tracking in order, and again, manage future kind of liability from outstanding credits by tying it to the exact same entity. Yes, through the chair. Yeah, through the chair to Councillor St. Pierre. Yeah, so if a company that is possesses outstanding amount of DCC credits, say it's this project B and has $100,000 worth of credits and they go bankrupt, it is treated like an asset. So it's something the bank could actually treat as $100,000 worth of potential infrastructure DCC, I guess, reductions to their DCCs if that same company was to undertake another development. So yeah, they are treated as basically cash. So yeah, they don't just go away. So that's again part of the tracking of this. So I mean, developers will be eligible for credits in any case, whether or not this policy exists. This policy helps kind of with the implementation of that, and importantly, the tracking of that and the management of that by connecting it to the same legal entity. So the legislation is very gray around credits and latecomers, and this policy is meant to kind of provide a bit of guidance to staff in the district for how to implement them. So very good example. We have a developer that goes under, they've got, $100,000 of DCC credits, connected to that company. How is that managed? Then I guess it takes how that works on the bank side and how they take ownership and they actually kind of, manage that asset is a different question. But hypothetically, if they were to kind of keep that entity in existing, they could use those credits. So that's like a consideration in terms of how many credits are outstanding is also an important question. In fast growing communities like Souk, you could have situations where you have multiple developers with multiple amounts of outstanding credits. And, if that number, was unknown, it could be a liability because it's essentially money that you won't collect through the DCC program or through the payment of DCCs. So you'll have to kind of factor that in when you actually, do your DCC updates and account for how many DCCs you're collecting. So instead of a credit.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, they could request a rebate, and this is why we'll go into the front enders agreement, but that's contingent on having enough money in your DCC reserves. So it would also be, you have the option to provide them a rebate, but you have to provide them a credit or a rebate or do the front end agreement. The rebate option's more challenging because it affects your own cash flow on the DCC side because you're trying to generate enough money to deliver your program. If you are offering up rebates, which essentially allows some developers to skip the line and say, well, this project wasn't really planned for 8 years, but I'm going to build it and I want a rebate. You've kind of taken out money from your DCC reserves to build this project out of sequence when really that should maybe go towards higher priorities. So it also would depend on how much was in your reserves. So you kind of wear the reserves down, whereas by either kind of offering the credit or the front ender, you kind of help to manage some of that cash flow and liability down the road. So the credits, again, will reduce the over amount of DCCs you collected from that developer, but they also are providing part of the program, and that's kind of the trade-off. And I'll get into the front end agreement here, which is basically when we hit a certain threshold, you could again entertain that rebate line. So say in this case, the developer builds $500,000 worth of infrastructure, but they only owe 100,000. Sorry, I'll change the numbers here. Say they build $1 million worth of infrastructure, but they only owe $200,000 worth of DCCs, and they have $800,000 in DCC credits. That's quite a lot of money, and you want to work with the development community to build this infrastructure because they're helping to fulfill your DCC program. They're building projects that you want to see. If the district is choosing to work with them in that regard, then you could enter into a front end agreement. You could rebate that 800,000, but again, that would probably deplete a bunch of your reserves and really prevent more high priority projects from going forward. So what the front end agreement does is say, okay, we're going to set up an agreement where that $800,000 of extra DCC credit that you have, because you're probably not going to use it, through this development or future developments, we're going to actually reimburse that over time from future DCCs collected. And that's what the front end agreement does. So it essentially allows, like a latecomer, it allows the district to remit a portion of all DCCs collected for that particular service back to a front-ending developer that works in excess of what's required of them under the DCC program. So again, they build $1 million pump station. They only need $200,000 worth of credits. It's a big kind of risk and big investment for them. So a front-end agreement would allow them. And in this case, we've made the threshold $500,000 in excess of any DCC credits once those are deducted from what they owe. So maybe we can restate that in a more clear way. So if they owe $200,000 worth of DCC credits, yet even after having those credits reduced, they still owe an additional still have additional $500,000 worth of credits, then the district will consider entering into a front ender agreement with them to basically help them get paid back over time. Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so essentially like where they kind of have completed works that are beyond, like much further beyond what's required for their own site and beyond what they would owe in DCCs by $500,000, then this would allow them to get paid back that that remaining amount that would be provided in credits that they may never use through future DCCs collected. So if you build $1 million pump station, and again, you get $200,000 of that back in credits, you have 800,000, kind of remaining in DCC credits. The district will then remit back 40% of DCCs collected from sewer DCCs to that developer until they're paid back. So we've set a timeline of 15 years again to align with the latecomer policy there. So then they would actually have that money reduced ideally. So depending on how many, but it is a risk to them because depending on how much development occurs and how many sewer DCCs you collect, that 40% portion that they're getting of each of those, DCC payments, may or may not actually pay them back within that 15-year timeline. The other 60% goes into your DCC reserves and can be spent on other DCC projects. So this also allows you to keep building your reserves.
So two follow-up questions. One is what happens after 15 years? And the other is really, this is giving basically an interest-free loan to the district to pay for needed infrastructure, but what's the advantage to the developer?
Through the chair. Once the agreement is done, it's done. Basically, they won't receive any more DCC payments. So they won't get back, 40% of the rest of the DCC. So they may not get paid back. So there's a risk to them. I think in this case, like the DCCs, and I'll maybe ask you here too. The agreement would end if there was any outstanding DCC credits owed, then that could potentially be something that would continue to exist after, because they don't really go away. Is there any thoughts on that?
Yeah, just to clarify through the acting mayor to Councillor St. Pierre. So you asked that one question about the 40%. They could get all of their money back if the DCCs collected in the 15 years were enough to pay back the developer. But the district is keeping 60% because it has a number of other projects. And your question was, what's the advantage to the developer? The DCC program for the District of Sauk is a 20-year program. These large infrastructure, and it's generally going to be for large infrastructure pieces, pump stations, things like that. If it's a 10 meters of water main, the district can generally handle that within its DCC reserves. So it's for those large projects, and it's generally those projects that are going to be built later on in the program. And so the advantage to the developers, they get that project sooner rather than later. They are front ending that, they're advancing history. So the alternative, the district, if they didn't have the reserves in place, they would have to say to the developer, well, if you wait 10 years, we will have enough money in our reserves to be able to fund that sewer pump station. So if you want to have your project go sooner, you will have to advance that history, advance that project, front end that project, and then we'll pay you back over time.
Yeah. Excellent. So it would be again 40%, maximum 40% of the DCs that would be remitted forward to that front end developer for a maximum period of 15 years. In the policy, it's also contemplated if you had multiple front enders, so you have, a developer builds a sewer pump station location A and another developer builds a sewer pump station in location B. We would still only give a maximum of all future DCCs collected. So then they would each just get 20% of the DCCs collected. So the more front ender agreements that you have in place for each service, the amount that they'd be actually provided from the future DCCs collected would go down until those front end agreements were resolved or terminated after 15 years. The district does not anticipate having too many front end agreements for each service in place at the same time. However, it could happen, but that's again a policy to help manage risk to the district by making it so you don't oversubscribe your kind of DCC collections and limit the growth of your reserves so that you can actually implement again the projects in the sequence that you're hoping to implement them. And to Dan's point, that is kind of the risk of skipping the line. They get the project today, but they don't necessarily get all their money back. But there's a reasonable chance they will in a lot of cases. So it does allow the mechanism to actually work, the district to work with developers to get this infrastructure built. And again, just as a note, DCC front end agreements are not eligible for the inclusion of interest costs, and that's because DCC projects are also not eligible for the inclusion of interest. So this is the difference between the front ender and the DCC, DCC front ender and the latecomer policies, is that latecomers include interest, DCC front end policies do not. So just a final slide here. So next steps would be the endorsement of the policies. Then it'd be finalizing the agreements and their templates, and then there'll be some back end implementation components as well, notably updating the district's fee and charges bylaw to reflect the $5,000 administration fee, which is applicable to both the latecomer agreements and front ender agreements. And questions? Thank you very much.
Councillor Pearson.
Yeah, I have about 2 or 3 questions. First one is the DCC program transferable to a different project not associated with the development?
Like,
So I have a company X. We're going to build a subdivision up on the rock, but District of Sauk has a DCC road in the middle of town. Can that company, because they have the capability to do that project, can they take that? Can they take that DCC program? If or is that something that they can negotiate? Say they're a road building company, they're doing their own roads up there, but there's a DCC road somewhere else that needs to be built.
Through the chair to Councillor Pearson.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess hypothetically, like if they went, a company decided they want to deliver a roads project to get DCC credits and then apply those credits for development in another area. I guess it's something that could be entertained, but it's not really the purpose of the policy.
No, I understand that. Just sometimes I see, a big project in the background where some company has the wherewithal, like blasting rock as an example, and you got a big hole to fill.
Yeah, so I guess, that front end agreement piece would be like
Interesting.
the more interesting piece of it, but essentially any entity, developer or company that constructs a DCC project on behalf of the district is eligible for DCC credits, and that's kind of the legislation is clear about stating that piece of it. So yes, if they did that work without payment on behalf of the district, then they would be able to receive credits for that.
Second question is, how do you determine the latecomer fees? I know we had one big project here in Sauk that was eligible for latecomer fees, but it kind of fell apart because there wasn't assigned a value per property downstream afterwards. So how does that go about, and what leverage do you have to ensure that the latecomer fees are actually collected against a small, like hooking up to a sewer as an example? That's a great one because people are converting from a drain field, somebody ran a sewer pipe past.
Yeah, great question through the chair to Councillor Pearson. Yeah, so that's a function essentially of the latecomers. If there's not what's described as a benefiting area, then they can't be applied. So every latecomer agreement, as it comes into place under the policy, will define a benefiting area, and that benefiting area is basically determined as those properties that benefit from the excess and extended services provided by the front ending developer in this case, and that is outlined in the policy basically how we would determine that benefit area, and then each property is assigned what's called like basically a future development unit. So these basically evaluate the development potential of each of those parcels within the benefiting area, and they break down the final kind of excess and extended service cost in the latecomer. So say again, the latecomer identified $500,000 of excess and extended services in addition to what the developer required for their own development. That $500,000 would be broken out amongst the benefiting lands.
Just
Divided up, and then basically through the latecomer policy, we would create a per unit charge for each unit, potential units. Yeah, exactly. So then that 500 would get divided by the total future potential of all the units in that benefiting area, and that would create the latecomer charge. So, and that would be basically paid by the developer when they go to change the land use, increase density on the property. Sorry, by the property owner, not the front ending developer, but future developers would pay that latecomer fee essentially at the time when they go to build to higher density.
My third question.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, that was a good answer. Thank you. Both of those were good answers. So my third final question is, Urban Systems here today. How come? Was it a staff request or I'm not sure. How did you come to be here?
Through the chair, I believe it was the request of staff who are not able to be here today.
Oh. No, I didn't see a tender or anything going on. I'm just kind of, I didn't know if it was something that was ongoing from prior council or something like that. I was wondering.
Through the chair. So yes, we've been supporting the district with this initiative as kind of a follow-up work to the development cost charge program. And so we've been working with staff to build these policies essentially.
Councillor St. Pierre.
Probably just a quick question. I'm curious about what happens if there's a discrepancy, especially with, the cost of projects going up between the list value and the DCC approved and the actual, construction costs. If that sort of thing, gets out of hand, wouldn't that be a disincentive for developers to actually step up to the plate? Because now there's only a guarantee of, it might spend 3 million on a project that's only listed at, 2 million. And is there some mechanism for adjusting on the fly these numbers so that the estimates are closer to actual value?
Through the chair, to Councillor St. Pierre, that's a great question. It is a risk that they could potentially have much higher costs associated with these delivery of these DCC projects. That's I guess an important reason to keep the DCC program up to date. There's lots of ways to kind of keep the program up to date without too much maintenance. You can do minor updates to actually inflate the costs, just the cost. You wouldn't change all the underlying assumptions, which is a lot faster. You're also able to increase the program annually by CPI for a period of up to 4 years. So keeping the costs up to date is probably one of the best mechanisms to ensure that it remains fair. But that is also part of the front end risk of that developer getting to skip the line. And that's why we keep it to the lesser of the actual project value or the DC project value in the program, because then you could be obligated to provide a lot more credits than you're wanting to, and actually haven't been contemplated in the DC program. So this again could kind of limit your ability to deliver other projects, because then you'd be oversubscribing your credits and potentially reducing the DCCs collected in the long run. So it is a bit of a risk, but this is designed, I guess, with the district's financial sustainability in mind in regards to DCCs.
I was thinking that it protects the district from the risk of taking on liability, unknown amounts of liability.
Yes.
At the same time, it also could potentially prevent necessary projects from going forward, which is also a risk to the district. So I was curious how that balanced it and making sure that projects that we want going forward are going forward, even though risks are potentially larger. But thank you. That's great.
Councillor Bateman.
Yeah, through you to our guests here. Good to see you in person. I think we started back in 2020 with this, and you were testing out our Zoom and Teams ability to meet, and we successfully got through the process. And this bylaw was adopted on June 13th of last year. Can I assume that these new policies are based on best industry practices?
Through the chair, that is correct. There
Yes.
some best industry practices, and they support again the implementation of the legislation.
Right, okay. And this is the logical next step following adoption of the bylaw. And it's good to know Mr. Hartshorn was at a stakeholder Zoom with developers back in 2021 when this was being developed, and he made it very clear, I quote, "It's almost your most important thing right after this adoption is DCC credits. It would be disrespectful to the industry." So we're doing the right things here, clearly. Moving on to the DCC bylaw as a whole, I'm curious about a few things. First of all, this bylaw needs to be reviewed every 3 to 4 years in terms of the actual tariffs. Yes.
Through the chair to Councillor Bateman. Yeah, so the bylaw best practice is to review it every 3 to 5 years. There's no obligation to do that bylaw review, but for, to the point of Councillor St. Pierre and to others, like when that bylaw gets more out of date, your projects are just, they're not actually representative of the real project costs. So two things are going to happen in this case, or more things could happen, but one is you're going to undercollect DCCs, so you won't actually generate sufficient reserves to deliver your program. That's what happens when programs get really out of date. They're just like, they're not funding the list appropriately. The second is exactly to Councillor St. Pierre's point, your credits are going to get really out of sync if you are in a fast-paced development environment like Souk, and you are working with developers to deliver some projects on the DCC project list. It makes it harder to work with them and provide the appropriate, amount of credits or appropriate front under where applicable when you want to actually have those collaborative project delivery mechanisms.
Okay. And in terms of the DCC project list, which is everything's costed out with contingencies, is that project list and those costs updated annually, or how does that work? Because these are 2021 numbers, things have changed.
Yes, through the chair to Councillor Bateman. So they're built with some contingency in them. And they're Class D estimates because, some are very far in the future, some are likely to happen, sooner than later. So some of the costs when we go to create these programs are like fairly well known because they're kind of happening in the next 2 to 3 years. Others are kind of like 15, 20 years out. So it's a little more opaque as to kind of what they'll actually cost. And that's why the update's really key. There's that 40% contingency in there, which can help a little bit, but when you're in high an environment like today where your construction costs are changing really rapidly and increasing rapidly, that they can come out of date quite quickly. So you can do, again, the CPI to kind of keep pace, but then you can do it only 4 times, and you can do that annually. And then you can do minor updates, which you can just impact the costs. You can actually adjust the growth estimates. So those can help carry you to the next major update, which will actually kind of do the detailed dive into growth and project costs and things like that. So program that we created and was adopted last June was very much to bring everything up to date, and it was a pretty quick cut at it. So we're actually there's a plan to go back and look at this in more detail too in the coming year. And even in that time, since 2021, when those costs are being updated, because there's a bit of a lag too between us creating the project lists, creating the rates, bringing it forward, having it reviewed by the ministry, having it adopted. In that 2 years time frame, we've probably seen like upwards of 20% cost increases there too. So there's going to be merit in updating it sooner or later, especially since there's so much growth in the community.
Okay, I think.
I just wanted to add, just on that vein, just to remind council that there is $50,000 allocated in 2023's budget for a DCC major update this year. Tagging on to what they're saying there is due to the delay in get everything adopted. That's one thing that we realize is it's already due for a major update. So that is, we're just trying to get this piece done. And then the next focus would turn to the major update and getting the costs updated, potentially adding different projects in there because we've been able to complete a few of the projects. So it's just kind of confirming all those pieces, and that information will come to council late fall, early winter. I believe it would be the standing rough date right now is obviously there's a lot of prep work we need to do behind the scenes to get that in front of council. So that is the plan, is to do that. And then just wanted to touch on quickly Councillor Pearson's question about why is Urban doing this, and just clarifying that operations has a $45,000 consultant budget every year that they can use at their discretion for lower cost consultant help that they need throughout the year. So this is one low dollar initiative that operations has used some of that funding for.
Councillor Pearson. Okay, thank you. Through the chair. Thank you for that answer. And the reason I was asking is because we recently closed an RFP that's looking at all of our policies, procedures, and bylaws in their entirety. And I was kind of like, it was just striking me as that, is this, because it's ongoing and I understand that, is this going to be part of that? Are we going to look at DCC's bylaws and policies as part of that overall review? I would expect we probably are. Given the list that I saw anyways.
Through your worship, I don't know that that was a direct correlation. I'm assuming you're referring to the development approvals grant tender that just closed. That's more specific on the development approval side of the world. This is a piece of it, but we're already making a lot of headway to that. Somebody can clarify me if I'm misunderstanding this, but we're doing this initiative with separate buckets of funding. The DCC major update is not using that development approvals grant funding. That these are other courses. What we're doing is part of normal business. The the development approvals grant is a different stream that has specific criteria. Updating those bylaws wasn't what staff had requested funding for. It was the building bylaw, the subdivision. Those bylaws were the bylaws and policy work, because these ones were already underway. That wasn't funding we requested from the province for that piece of it. I don't believe that this initiative is included in the development approvals grant directly. Mr. Pella can maybe clarify a bit more on that.
Was included in the header on the RFP that went out. I thought UCCs were included in.
No, just to reiterate what Ms. Gray was saying, that those were works that are already budgeted as part of the DCC's update. So this was all part of the package. So we knew that work needed to be completed in advance of the work of the development approvals grant. So that's why they're separate pieces. As the development approvals grant gets awarded to the successful bidder, which we'll be bringing forward to council next week, actually on Tuesday, May 23rd. We will go and work with the successful candidate to go through all the information that we want to have updated. Should there be budget amounts that are left over as part of that grant stream, we could look at additional work. But in terms of the separation of the two, this was one bucket of money that was dedicated to the DCC updating. Development approvals grant was for all other aspects of that review that we have stated in our RFP.
Okay, I was a little bit surprised, but not disappointed to see you guys here. I was when I read the agenda, I thought this was going to be a report from staff. So happy that you made it here. And so I had a question that probably would be best directed to staff, and that is, how are DCC eligible projects identified? And as municipal infrastructure evolves and needs change due to growth, etc., is there a mechanism to include additional DCC program projects, and who determines what those projects might be?
Thanks. The DCC program, like for roads and stuff, would have came from the transportation master plan. So it has the Throop connector, the charters, the Brownsy, they're all identified in there. And some of the bulk costs were kind of identified in the transportation master plan too, which is why updates need to go, because they're based on Class D estimates. So once we move forward with designs and we get better and better estimates, we know that they're not in the ballpark, which is why we need to do an update this year. Same for sewer. It would be the ones that were in the DCC plan were for identified areas, especially if they were in the transportation master plan too, like Brownsy, there's no sewer down there, even though they're in the sewer area. And that's a road we want to go. So we don't want the road to go without the sewer sort of thing. What was the other half of the question? Sorry.
Basically, how do we determine what projects get added to the DCC program?
The road ones were from the transportation master plan. I wasn't involved with the sewer DCCs, but I would assume it would be the same thing. What other DCCs do we charge? Sewer, road? Parks would have been Parks and Trails master plan. Ones were identified from parks.
Yeah, so any of the master plans as we go through, like all master plans, we want to start getting into a proper review cycle. So when we go and review through those projects, we'll see what new items are being communicated as a need for the community. And at that time, through a future DCC bylaw amendment, there may be a proposal to remove certain projects, now that completion and everything has been collected, and then to add new projects to the DCC list. So really all of that information should come through an informed process of either updating the master plans or other strategic plans that are being developed in alignment with other master plans. There could be a subcomponent based on a specific study area that a master plan doesn't get into a lot of detail, and that strategy kind of like a town core sewer strategy could look specifically as, okay, we need these services. We have projected growth based on the official community plan, and we know this is a target area. We want it in our DCC program. So goes through a public process through the amendment of the DCC bylaw. And then at that time, the public and ultimately developers will know what are DCC eligible projects.
Okay, thanks. Counselor St. Pierre.
I'd like to move that the committee of the whole recommend council endorse the development cost charge credit policy. The committee of the whole recommend council endorse the development cost charge front ender policy. The committee of the whole recommend council endorse the amended latecomer policy. The committee of the whole recommend council rescind policy number 8.7, access or extended services policy 2011. And that the committee of the whole recommend council direct staff to prepare amendments to the district fees and services charges bylaw and the district's latecomer interest bylaw to align with the new development policy framework.
Okay. Anything to motivate?
I can speak briefly. I think that this is following up on previous work. It's prudent. It protects the district interest while actually motivating and also protecting developers to a large extent. I think it's just the next step in the process and we should follow through. There it is.
Any further comments? Okay, so I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, motion's carried. Counselor Pearson opposed.
Thank you very much for having us today.
Okay, and next, a motion that the committee of the whole rise and report. Moved by Counselor St. Pierre. Okay,
Just call the question on that one.
call the question. All in favor? Opposed? It's unanimous.
And then that brings you back into the special council where you can consider these recommendations before adjourning.
Okay, so we're back into regular council, special council, and so the committee of the whole recommendations are that council receive the presentation titled overview of the Capital Regional District Services and Partnerships for Information, that council postpone consideration of the Fireweed Foundation request until such time as Climate Action Grant Stream program has been implemented, and that council endorse development cost charge credit policy, that council endorse development cost charge front ender policy, that council endorse the amended latecomer policy, that council rescind policy number 8.7, excess or extended services policy 2011, and the council directs staff to prepare amendments for the district's fees and services charges bylaw and the district's latecomer interest bylaw to align with the new development policy framework. Need a seconder now. Okay, moved by Councillor Bateman, seconded by St. Pierre. All in favor? Opposed? Pearson's opposed. Okay, and now I need a motion to adjourn. By St. Pierre, seconded by Pearson. All in favor? We're done. Thank you.